All right, so now we're going to talk about functions and scope. And I know a lot of you already understand functions, and that's fine, but I do want people that are new to JavaScript and new to programming to basically be able to start from scratch and learn what functions are and how to use them. So let's get started with some of the basics. So first of all, a function is it's a way to group code together that you can run later. You can run at any time and as many times as you want. And it's a way to make your code more readable and easier to understand. So to create a function, there's actually multiple ways, and I'm going to show you multiple ways. But for now, we're going to do kind of the basic way to create a function, and that's using the function keyword. So after that, we can give a function any name we want. Let's say we want to call it say hello, and then we need to add in our parentheses. Okay, now in the curly braces here is where the function body goes. This is the code that will run when we run our function. So I'm just going to have this function do a simple console log of hello world. All right, now if I save this, nothing is going to happen because all I've done is defined or declared the function. I haven't run it. To run it, we have to put in the function name and then a set of parentheses. So if I go ahead and save that and run it, you'll see that it'll console log hello world. So that's the absolute simplest function that you could write. Now, when it comes to passing data into a function, we do that with parameters. Okay, and there's a difference between parameters and arguments. A lot of times they're used interchangeably, which I think is fine. But just to be really specific, when you're declaring a function, like let's say we have a function called add, and when we're putting in here the variables that we want to be able to be passed in, like let's say we want x and y, or let's be a little more specific. We'll say num1 and num2. So this function takes in two numbers. These are the parameters, okay, that the function can take. And then what I'm going to have this function do is just console log num1 plus num2. So it'll evaluate that expression and log it to the console. Now, when I call this function, so I say add, and then I pass in the numbers that I want to add, let's say 5 and 10. These are arguments, okay? When you're declaring the function, these are parameters. When you pass in a value here, these are arguments. But again, people will say I'm passing in a parameter of 5, and I think that's fine. I'm not like, one of those sticklers. And just to be clear on the kind of the vocabulary, when we run a function like this is invoking a function or calling a function. When we do this is defining or declaring a function. Now, most of the time when we create functions, we're returning some kind of value. These particular functions that I just created, they're not returning anything. They're just simply doing a console log. But usually we'll return something. So to give you an example, let's say function, and we'll call this subtract. Okay, and this is going to take in, again, let's say num1 and num2. And I'll get to scope, but just know that these variables, even though these are the same, it's okay because they're function parameters in different functions. So I can use num1 here and here. I couldn't use it like in the global scope. I couldn't create num1 and then create num1 again. So in here, let's go ahead and return. We do that with the return keyword. And we're going to return num1 minus num2. Now, I'm going to go ahead and invoke this by saying subtract. And then I'm going to pass in, let's say, 10 and 2. Now, if I save this, we don't see anything in the console because we haven't done any kind of console log. What we did is returned the result of this expression. Now, I'll get into why we return values in a second, but just know that anything we do under this, like let's just console log, we'll say after the return, if I go ahead and run this, we don't see the console log. That's because we've already returned, we've already exited the function, so it's not going to run anything after it. And in VS Code, you can see it's kind of a lighter contrast. Now, the reason we return something is because we want to do something with that value. So in this case, let's say we want to put it into a variable. So I can actually set, let's say right here, we'll say const, and then say result equals subtract 10 from 2, or I should say 2 from 10. And then I can do what I want with that result. So I'll just console log it. I'll say console log result, and now I get 8. I could also just console log the function. I could say subtract, and let's say, I don't know, 20 and 5. If I save that, I get 15. All right, so instead of console logging from here, this is going to hold whatever the value is that's returned. And there might be cases where you return with no value. You just write return, and that's good for like, let's say you're sending a request to a backend or an API, and you're updating something in a database, and you don't actually need to return anything. You might just return with no value. All right. Now, in the next video, I want to talk more about arguments and parameters. I know I mentioned them here and showed you, the basics, but I want to talk a little bit more about that in the next video.